On this episode, we talk with Nathan Nelson on how short-term missions can be transformed to make lasting global impact. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab, where we get to have conversations that help empower healthy churches. My name's Scott, and I am one of your hosts, and really glad to have another conversation today that hopefully is going to help strengthen, empower your church, and actually look at what does it look like to make a local and global impact through what we normally look at as short-term missions. We're excited to jump into this conversation, but before we do, I want to ask a favor of you. If you could leave a comment, a review, if you could share this podcast with someone, we would love for these conversations to make as much of an impact as possible and to serve as many churches and church leaders as possible. So by doing those things, it helps us get these conversations into more people's ears, and so we would so appreciate it. Now, today we get to talk with Nathan Nelson. And Nathan is the pastor of mission and outreach at Bethany Community Church in Seattle. He's worked throughout Latin America, Rwanda, and Seattle in church-based community development and short-term mission. He has a master's of divinity with an emphasis in international development and urban studies from Fuller Theological Seminary, and a bachelor's in global development and sociology from Seattle Pacific University. He's a contributor to the book Reimagining Short-Term Missions and lives every day in admiration for his beloved wife, Macy. This conversation was so impactful, and we talked about how churches can change some of the thinking and some of the philosophy behind traditional short-term missions so that they have lasting impact, so that they are actually accomplishing the desired result, and so that you see the kingdom impact continue on. So we are excited, and we invite you to join us in this conversation with Nathan Nelson. Well, Nathan, thanks so much for joining us here today on the Church Leadership Lab. We appreciate it.
So glad to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Now, one question we ask everybody to get things rolling, we just kind of read off your public bio, but sometimes there's things that don't make that public bio that all your friends, all your family know about you. So for you, what would something like that be?
You know, people know me in the Seattle area as the circus pastor. And
all right, tell me more about this. I got to hear more.
Yeah, the reason is I am part of the flying trapeze community in Seattle. My wife and I are. So I say I'm a pastor by day and I'm run off to the circus by night. And yeah, no kidding. That's how we spend our time.
Nathan, I'm like, all right, we gotta. I know people didn't listen to this episode for this, but we're gonna have to camp out here for a minute. For a couple of reasons. One, I always wanted to join the circus as a kid, was just like amazed, obsessed with it. It would, Ringling Brothers, Barnum and Bailey would come through the Chicago area. Always would go. I'd buy the VHS cassette tape to watch it after. Was obsessed with it. So that's one. The second is actually my wife and I have taken trapeze lessons before.
Really?
And so, yeah, so we've done, it was one lesson, so I'm no way an expert, but I love everything about that. So how did this start? Where did this begin?
Oh my gosh. You're the perfect captive audience for this conversation. So look out. That's so good. Basically my wife and I, we got invited by another couple at our church to go on a double date to this flying trapeze school in Seattle, where we live. And so we did it and we thought, oh, this will be a cool one-time experience, and we left and my wife looked at me and she was like, this is going to be our thing. And I was like,
I love it.
Okay. And really the rest was history.
Yeah,
I'm an instructor there now. I literally finish church on Sunday, go home for a brief bit, and then I go. And in the evenings, I'm teaching classes there, and we perform in shows together, and the whole thing. So we're in.
That's awesome. We could have kind of probably another separate episode where we just camp out on that and all things circus. But I know people didn't click play on this to hear that, but just know that blesses my heart. And I'm like,
I'm so glad to hear it.
If I was there, if I lived there, I would be taking lessons for sure. So maybe we'll have to arrange that somehow. Yeah. Man, that's awesome. Well, on that note, we are going to talk about not trapeze, but talking about, man, what does it look like for churches to really do missions well, and certainly locally, globally. There's kind of a whole lot packed into that conversation. But where I'd love to start, when we're recording this, is kind of the start of the summer. People might be listening to this at any time, but it's kind of that short-term mission trip season. And I know that there's things that happen on a short-term mission trip that, and I've been on a number of them myself. I'm sure you have, but that feel impactful, that might feel like, man, this is gonna be a great slideshow when we get home. But as time goes on, you sort of realize, I don't know actually how helpful that was. And sometimes there's things that are unhelpful, potentially harmful. So can we start there, kind of unpacking some of that as we jump into the conversation?
Absolutely. We are heading up on what is traditionally known as mission trip season, particularly for the church in North America. And, for context, I am the pastor of mission at our church that has 6 locations, the largest of which I spend most of my Sundays at. And, altogether, we have 3 global partners, which are organizations we go long and deep with, a decade plus, in kind of, highly focused, transformative, holistic community development work in those places. And so we send teams as part of that. So we have 3 teams that'll be going to visit our global partners this summer, very much like many other churches around the country. So, there's a great book that was written a number of years ago now on this topic, When Helping Hurts. I think it did a lot to inform the kind of philosophy and approach to mission, particularly short-term trips that we have at Bethany. And then I got to be a part of a book project that was seeking to take that work and build upon it. And the book is called Reimagining Short-Term Missions. And in it, we have a collection of authors. I'm one of many that essentially write from the perspective of the sending church, the facilitating organization, and then the receiving community. And all together, we've sought to distill kind of core themes of like the good, the bad, and the ugly of this thing that we call short-term missions. And so for us at Bethany, I'll just give you a quick little taste, and then feel free to kind of ask follow-up from there. But I speak on this concept of short-term missions. That's, kind of where my background started. I am the product, my faith is the product of a short-term mission trip I had no business being a part of. I was a punk high school student doing all the bad things. And literally my mom tricked me into going on a mission trip to Mexico with the local youth group. I thought I was going to party, and it turns out I had to have a meeting at a church before I went on this trip. So anyway, the rest was history for me. It was on that trip into a community in deep kind of the junglist regions of central Mexico, Mayan community, largely off the grid, that I met Christ in a profound way, that I got to experience another culture, a different context of material kind of poverty that I'd never been exposed to. And my life was never the same. I ended up working for that organization that facilitated that trip for several years thereafter. And it was through all those experiences that I've kind of been able to now, in the context of my role at Bethany, ask the question, where do these things fit? So for us, we call our short-term mission trips strategic visits to our global partners. We're very intentional with that language. Just the kind of quick version of why is, a mission trip. In Reimagining Short-Term Missions, the book, we sort of challenge the readers to say, call your trip what it is. Yeah. What is it really doing? A mission trip, my goodness, the mission of God is big. Are you really fulfilling the mission of God on this 7-day trip? Yeah. And if you are, man, more power to you. I want to know more. Many of us aren't maybe getting quite there. So what are we doing? We are being strategic. That the work that we do and the time that we're there matters. There's things that can be reasonably accomplished and things that can't be reasonably accomplished in that short period of time. But there's a value there, and it's because of that value that we still do it. So it's strategic and it's a visit. It's time bound. There's certain expectations for what can and can't happen in the context of a visit that appropriately boundary what it is that we go and do. So that's just a taste from the outset. The last thing I guess I'll say is that I believe that any short-term mission trip should only ever happen in the context of long-term partnership. And so we only send strategic visits to our global partners.
Well, if you're in ministry, then you know church operations can be a huge challenge. There's a lot to do, little time to do it, and whether it's just you or you have a team, my guess is you have a full plate. So how do you do things like communication and engagement, stewarding your finances, managing your digital presence, fostering community, and so much more in a way that builds a healthy church? Well, answering that question was the goal of creating the Guide to Healthy Church Operations. We wanted to take our 40 plus years of experience serving the church, combined with wisdom from various experts to provide a blueprint for how you can navigate the ever-changing world of church operations. In this guide, you'll find things like how to improve member engagement and participation, building into staff and volunteers, making better decisions with clear metrics, the essentials of financial stewardship for churches, and so much more. And of course, we wanted to give this to you for free. So there's a link in the show notes to download the Guide to Healthy Church Operations. And we would love for you to grab a copy and use it to help grow a healthy church. Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot there. I think one of the things that comes to mind for me is like that sort of takes a different context than when you share the vision of here's what this is, right? Because oftentimes you can say, hey, we have this group of people, whether it's youth group, whether it's just a collection of people at the church, they're going to this place. Here's what they're going to do, what they're going to accomplish, come back with these stories, pictures. And it's sort of like, this is what you are giving to or supporting, right? And there's sort of that like a little bit of ROI of like, not only am I sending these people on an experience, but I'm going to help, build an orphanage. I'm going to, whatever it might be. And I love the way that you talk about that shift in language in really what this is. But what I'm curious about then is, because for anyone who just heard that and they're like, was anyone going to support that? How could we raise funds for that? All of that. Like, how can churches then position those trips and better cast that vision when the purpose isn't necessarily do a bunch of projects? And I think you might have hit on some of it in that long-term partnership piece, but I'd love to hear you dive into that more. Yeah, absolutely. And this is one of the things that mission pastors will often ask me, because that sense of ROI often comes from the senior leadership in our church or the governing council, or just even the perception on behalf of the congregation that what is the real win of a mission trip. And mission pastors often will understand, it's not having 50 people go and paint something and come back and like talk about it, right? We get it that there's something else there, that if anything, that some of that work is doing more harm than good, to the point of when helping hurts. Yeah. But we have this pressure that, there's certain expectations for what success looks like. And so one of the things that I would say is it took years to get to the place where the leadership at our church came around and readjusted its understanding of what success can look like. And so when we talk about a trip, we don't talk about necessarily what's accomplished in that time. We're talking about what's been accomplished over the course of many years partnering with an organization in a region. We talk about, for example, our partnership with World Relief in Rwanda, where over 200,000 people have been directly impacted by uniting over 200 local churches to do the work of, transformative development. Yeah. None of that is celebrating Bethany exclusively. Yeah. We have a role in it, but it's the Rwandan church that's doing the work. It's our amazing partners at World Relief that are equipping and empowering the church to do this work. And when we go,
what do? We get to be what we call ambassadors. So we've reframed the entire notion of what it is to go on a trip around this idea of being an ambassador of Bethany Community Church to our global partners. And then when you return, you're committed to what we call an ambassadorship period, where for the next 6 months, you're representing the work of our shared partnership, wherever it may be in the world, to the rest of our church, to the rest of our community. And so we have certain events that folks will do. We ask people to distill their experience into a core theme that is a discipleship theme that can impact everybody. Because our goal is not to get people to go on trips. Our goal is that people are transformed by the reality of what God is doing through our partnerships around the world. And we believe that those partnerships have something to offer our identity for who and how it is that we are as a church and our own community. So we try to tie direct links between the nature of the work being done abroad and the nature of our work we do locally in mission, and vice versa. And so if you're a part of a trip, you are uniquely privileged to be a part of a small group of people who gets to be ambassadors of this work for a season. And the work is not to go do a thing in a short period of time and come back and talk about it. No, it's to enter into a legacy of relationship and partnership. You're stewarding those relationships for the well-being of the work abroad, for the well-being of our work in the city. It's a whole different frame. We have an average of 3 to 10 people that go on each of our trips. We're not taking 50 people. And so initially that could be perceived as less of a win. But the reality is it's a huge win. We just have to reframe our expectations around what the win is.
Yeah. It sounds like redefining success is a huge part of this process, because if you still have what a great slideshow and a good experience for our kids, that's a different measure of success. And we want a long-term partnership making an impact around the world. What's interesting, actually, my son and I and a small group, I think it was 7 of us, went to Kenya earlier this year in February to visit, to kind of do exactly what you're talking about, to visit with a long-term partner. We have a couple from our church who are missionaries there. It's a place that we are heavily supporting and believe in. But it was kind of a vision, trip, and not we built this thing, that's awesome trip. But what's been interesting then to see is how now we are we're fired up for that ministry. It's not just one person or two, right? And so how do you see, I have to imagine as those trips repeat and as more, groups of 3 to 10 go, what does that do then for the strength of that long-term partnership?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great question. Relationship is at the heart of all of this. I would say it's at the heart of all missional work at all. And sometimes we use that as a buzzword or almost like a cop-out for what we're actually doing. And we say, oh, no, we're going our short-term ministry, but it's all about relationship. Yeah. But relationships can still be harmful.
Sure.
And so one example I like to share about this is in the context of orphans and vulnerable children. If we're talking about if you're going and you're visiting kids that are in a really vulnerable situation and you're saying our trip is all about relationship and you're having a relationship with those kids, when you turn around and leave, that relationship you've built has now created detachment disorder in a group of already vulnerable kids. Yeah. So yes, relationship's important, but we need to be really intentional about what we mean with that. So we intentionally boundary the kinds of relationships that we have our ambassadors that are part of our strategic visits pursue. So the relationships that we pursue are with the staff of our partner organization.
Okay.
And so the staff are the people that are on the ground doing the work ongoing in a place like Rwanda. So it's the World Relief staff, specifically the staff in the region of Musanze, where we partner, that we're focused. So these are 10 people who are impacting these 200,000 people right? And so those 10 people, they're our focus relationally. We go on retreat together. They broker the relationship, the opportunity we have to do home visits to visit pastors and their churches, and the community members who are the beneficiaries of the program. But all the while, it's the staff who have those ongoing relationships that we come in behind. And we get to say, we're so blessed to be a part of supporting the work of these people. And we want to hear about how it's impacting you. So then the conversation with a kid or within their family is less about trying to build that little bond that we're going to have for a short period of time, and more about saying, man, what is it that this relationship you have with these people, with your church ongoing, how is it impacting you? And we're just here to bear witness to that. And get to carry these stories of transformation back home with us. So the small group of ambassadors that we have are focused on those relationships with staff. And when they come back, those ambassadors, they create a community at Bethany in Seattle of folks who've been to Rwanda, or they've been to Costa Rica, they've been to Nicaragua, and they love it. And over the years now, we've been partnered with each of these 3 global partners for over a decade. There's many dozens of people who've been a part of it. And those are the people who become the champions of a lot of our local missional efforts that are directly inspired by our global work. There's countless examples of that. One quick one is just our work in homelessness. Seattle's, like every other major city, has a huge challenge with people living outside. And so one of the ways that we've sought to embody the way that World Relief in Rwanda does its work through what they call church empowerment zones is to apply that methodology here in Seattle. So we have our own now church empowerment zone inspired by the church and its work in Rwanda here in Seattle. Churches along what we call our North Aurora corridor, home to the most concentrated area of homelessness. These churches, we've united together around an expert, awesome nonprofit in our area. And together we are serving the needs of our community. So that whole framework, again, was inspired by Rwanda. And it's our people who've been to Rwanda who came back and said, we can do this here. There's no reason we can't do this here. So,
Man, that's such a beautiful model, and sort of that reciprocal, ideas for the kingdom of God, bringing renewal to a place, bringing restoration, and seeing, hey, it's happening globally, but the framework is the same. Now, what I'm curious about, because I think what you're doing is amazing, but I also know a lot of churches have kind of more the traditional setup, right, or structure, and aren't necessarily approaching this way. So can you give a little bit of advice around how do you go from a traditional kind of short-term, we found a mission agency and just kind of went to a place and then left. How do you go from that to these long-term global partners, especially for churches that don't have a missions pastor or don't have maybe somebody who can exclusively focus on this?
Yeah, great question. Churches of all shapes and sizes can embody these same principles. It'll look different for sure, but it's actually a whole lot less work to do some of what we're talking about here than some of the more traditional models that ultimately prove to be not just necessarily ineffective for the long term, but also harmful.
Yeah.
So, one of the things that I would encourage first and foremost is to do your homework and look for an organization that has these principles of mission that align with your missional philosophy. So, for example, a holistic approach, that there's this notion of mutual transformation in the way that they work with partners, that the community that is the target sort of for impact is involved integrally into the leadership of the organization and of the work that's happening. Looking for some of those, there's so many wonderful organizations out there. For us, part of the exciting work always is looking out as we have new funding or new opportunity. What is, another organization in a different part of the world that we can partner with in this way?
Yeah.
And For sure, if you're a smaller church that you don't have a mission pastor or as much infrastructure in place that way, but you have the desire, the passion on behalf of the congregation, it can be really helpful to find kind of a mid-sized, at least, or a little larger mission organization that has these principles in place, but also has the tools in place to kind of come and help you build around a healthy model already. One of the things that I think is the most classic example of how short-term mission, whether through a large or small church in the U.S. and work abroad, can happen, that's super unfortunate, with everyone's well-intentioned, is when we talk about trying to impact orphans, particularly and vulnerable children of all kinds. This sort of category of kiddo we call OVC.
Yeah.
And so often, there are traditional, what we call institutionalized care models in place around the world. These are things like orphanages. Kids end up in these places, and it's heartbreaking. And as churches in the U.S., it feels like a no-brainer that, to send a team to go and love on these kids in a place like that. It's a captive audience in a boundaried area. You can go, you can stay on site, you can love on these kids. What we don't realize in all of those good intentions is that kids were never meant to grow up at an institution. Kids were meant to grow up in the context of a family. And so we look for instead family-based care solutions to orphans and vulnerable children. It's harder, it feels more complex, but these kinds of mid-size and larger nonprofits I'm talking about are the ones that are well positioned to invite your church into a better approach to a family-based care model for orphans and vulnerable children. Your trip isn't going to be to an orphanage, and that's okay. It could be to a community where you learn about the work that's happening so that a church, the community itself, can wrap around and care for kids in ways that's more sustainable, that leads them to the experience of growing up in a family like God always intended. That's super important. I think that if you take that classic example of a church sending a team to an orphanage and you break that down, you go, first of all, orphanage, not ideal.
Yeah.
We know that, just to stay on this topic for a second, 8 in 10 orphans in an orphanage have a biological family member who's well positioned to care for them. Let's strengthen that relationship, right? That's the context kids are meant to grow up in. So let's break that down. Let's find a better approach to caring for these kids in the context of family. Let's strengthen their family network around them. And then what does it look like for us as a church to be involved in that? Well, let's support the work on the ground that it takes to build that infrastructure. And for us, then it's those 10 staff members in Musanze El Rwanda, for example. They're the people doing that family strengthening work. And we get to go on a trip and bless and encourage them. And we get to hear from the families. Way more impactful on the ground and way more encouraging for those that go to come back and share those stories than if they had gone to something like a traditional orphanage. Does that help you answer your question?
Yeah, it totally does. And I think, that was one of the things I know I wanted to even touch on in our conversation, because that tends to be the focus of trips. And I know in talking with you previously and reading some of your work and others, like that is ultimately one of those things that we do, not to be too intense about it, but to feel really good about ourselves, and I don't think that's the heart necessarily, but sometimes there does need to be this kind of stepping back to say, okay, what do we want to do here? And I believe, the motivation for most is we want to make an impact for the kingdom of God and see the kingdom of God continue to expand and take ground. But what I love about really our conversation and the work that you're doing, and I know others are, is that you're helping people say, hey, let's step back and let's just pause for a minute and look at how is that actually happening? Because if that's your heart and desire, then there is probably some adjustment to the method in which it's happening. And so I think it's really helpful to share that and to get into some of those specifics, really, because, some people are, I think, welcoming that, but need somebody to point that out.
Yep. And one of the things that I think the pandemic did for us, which I know it's a strange concept to look back at COVID and go, thank you, COVID, for this thing.
Sure.
But I'm kind of a relentless optimist. And so I think one of the things that happened is there was this pause on short-term mission trips, right?
Yeah.
Regionally, globally. And there was a great Barna research study that we got to be a part of that the results of which sort of elevated these kinds of things we've been talking about as when, if you were to strip it all away, what about short-term missions would the communities who receive them say, we want to come back? And it's always the relationship, but it's not just any old relationship. It's strategic relationship with those that have the relationships ongoing on the ground. It's a frequency of visiting that cultivates authentic relationship that people can learn from in both directions. And so there's something in short-term missions that the communities who receive them actually do want to happen still. They want us to come back. They want teams to be sent again, but not in the same way that they've been done traditionally.
Yeah.
And so there's a lot to be learned there. To me, there's a lot of hope there. And, I facilitate a group of mission pastors here in the Pacific Northwest region. We're like a little community of practice, the Pacific Northwest Mission Collective, we call ourselves.
Nice.
And, some of our churches are just now, for the first time since the pandemic, sending global trips again this summer. And as they're doing that, it's been really fascinating to hear that they've had this sort of sabbatical, if you will, from sending teams that's allowed them to do this refining work. And less people are interested in going, but those that are interested in going are interested in doing the kinds of things that we're talking about. And so what I would say the church in North America, really all over the world, if you're in the business of sending teams, has the opportunity to do here is to ask the question anew, why do we do it? Call it what it is.
Yeah.
Bring people to the table towards that end and watch as the world's better for it.
Yeah.
But we don't need to be convincing people to go change the world in 7 days and kind of lie about it when we get back. Like that's not the thing. It's so people are throwing the baby out with the bathwater, so to speak, when it comes to short-term missions because of that. I would say, I passionately believe, because my own faith story, as I started with, holds this intention for me. There is a place for an experience like this. It can be hugely formative for everybody involved, but we got to really look seriously at what that is and hone in on that more together.
Yeah, man, that is really helpful. And I think you've given a lot of both big picture, how to kind of change some of the philosophy and thinking, but also some really practical things that I think church leaders are going to walk away with. Now, one question that we always ask on this podcast, the goal is conversations that empower healthy churches. So I would love to hear from you, someone serving in a church, someone who's seeing the church globally as well. In your opinion, what's one essential component of a healthy church?
Oh, what a great question. Well, there are many, but if I had to pick one, I was actually just talking to a gentleman, I'd be remiss to not mention him by name, Moses Ndahiro, who is the former country director of World Relief in Rwanda, who we partnered together all 8 years that I've been on staff at Bethany. He just recently went to a new organization, Hope International, where he's one of the big wigs now, but we were just on a call this morning and he's my thought partner for the state of the church around the world. And so we had this just great dialogue around the current state of the church. And I asked him a similar question. And so I'd almost share his response as my own response, which was for any healthy church, there has to be this essential notion that it is part of transforming all of life. It's not just the spiritual well-being of the congregation, right? Or even the broader community. It's the whole, all the needs, all the gifts coming to bear through the local church.
Yeah.
For us in North America, that's kind of like insane to think about. Like, like your job at Microsoft or your job at Amazon, we're out here in Seattle where all these companies are, like that is as much a part of the kingdom work of the gospel as my job as a pastor. But you have to ask the question, how? How is it, right? Do I see my role Monday to Friday, 9 to 5 as a means to an end of making money?
Yeah.
Or is there something else here? The way I think about my work, the way I posture myself at work, the way that my work contributes to the well-being of more folks. And so if your church is looking holistically at how it's equipping people to be disciples into the world, towards that end, I think you're on to something. If church is about kind of running a program for itself, keeping the wheels turning on this thing, then we're just playing church. And so Moses is an inspiration to me because he's working in churches in the most under-resourced parts of the globe where it's not a choice. Does the church get to be spiritual or something else?
Yeah.
It's the reality. The church is well positioned to provide the very basic needs and resources that communities need to survive, right? And ultimately to thrive. How about for us in more privileged contexts? Can we measure the success of our church by the well-being of the most vulnerable in our community? And if you do, how successful is your church?
Yeah, that's a powerful question. And I'm really glad that you asked that because I think it's one to be chewed on and thought through. And, I think ultimately leads to maybe some reprioritization, as the Spirit leads. But, so appreciate you sharing your wisdom with us. We're going to keep going. We're going to jump into a section that we call our final five. These are a little more rapid fire, so they'll come at you quick. All right. First one, what is one book that you'd recommend to church leaders?
Can I be self-promotional here or no?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
I invite you to.
Short-term missions.
Yes. I love it. We're going to link to that. We're already going to link to it, but we're going to bold the link now so people really see that. And
Great.
Would definitely recommend people pick that up. All right. Number 2, last thing that you listen to. So Spotify, Apple Music, wherever you listen to things.
I'm a huge music fan. So I'm going to go Judah and the Lion. Their new record is out on the Process of Grief. And it's my anthem these days.
I have been listening, wearing that out, so to speak. You can't really wear it out because it's a digital file, but, if we could, I would have been as well. So I'm with you on that. Love it. Favorite piece of technology or software. And the only rule that we have is we take the phone off the table as an answer. So
that's so good. I'm old school when it comes to all things technology. My wife jokes that I am an old man in this regard. I drive a 77 Chevy pickup.
Nice.
You can hear me and smell me coming from a mile away. So I'm going to go with the old fashioned carburetor. That's my favorite piece of technology.
I love it. We ask this question to a lot of people, and actually some of my favorite answers are when they are like, they go back to, like a carburetor, like the wheel, or like, you know what I mean? We think technology and we're like iPhone, Apple Watch, whatever. Yeah. So I always love those answers. It's great. Number 4, what's a quote or piece of advice that stuck with you over the years?
I love the quote. I first heard it in Spanish, actually, se hace camino al andar, which is the road is made by walking. And that has, just sort of poetically stuck with me for sure as I think about what it is to innovate through the church.
Yeah, very cool. All right, last one. One thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders.
The church can change the world, friends. It really can. I really, really believe that. If I didn't believe that, I literally wouldn't be doing what I'm doing. But we're not going to change the world if we maintain the status quo. So we can't be afraid to strip it down and build it back better. Yeah.
Very good. Well, can you share with people where you would point them just for more resources, either articles that you've written or just things on short-term mission? Would you just kind of point us that direction?
Yeah, I would love to. You asked the question earlier, kind of if there's resources available or what advice I would give to churches that are seeking to kind of maybe reform their missional approach and where short-term trips fall in. The organization Faith to Action is stellar at helping churches, organizations transition from looking specifically at that space of orphans and vulnerable children, transitioning from a more institutionalized care model to a family-based care one. They have whole resources on how your short-term mission trips can support family-based care solutions.
Awesome.
So for sure, I would check out Faith to Action. Also, Reimagining Short-Term Missions, our book. We have a podcast as well and blogs coming out. So you can check out our website there. And then, truly, I think some of the best Christian development in the world is happening through one of our key partners, which is World Relief. And so I would really recommend anyone, you don't have to partner, you don't have to give money, but if you want to learn, their mission is to empower the local church to serve the most vulnerable, and they will do that in whatever way they can. So reaching out to those folks is a good idea as well.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link to all of that for people who just want to make it easy. Click the links, but we'll make sure to list all that out and certainly encourage people to take that action and explore everything that Nathan just shared. And Nathan, thanks so much for taking the time today to be with us and to share your wisdom, your experience, and to provide some loving challenge, I think, to how churches view and do short-term missions, and even that phrase, right? And so we so appreciate that. And we thank those of you listening or watching this. Again, our goal is conversations that empower healthy churches. So we hope that this has done that. If it has, we would invite you to share it with somebody. You can subscribe, leave a review, send a link, and just recommend to a friend. All of that helps us get these conversations into the ears of more church leaders. And hopefully in doing that, get to empower more healthy churches. So we thank you so much for being with us today, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.